So I want to take you back to the office of Senator Linda Reynolds.
So he was a bit of a favourite of Minister Reynolds.
Oh, hi mate. Bruce Lehrman here with Minister Linda Reynolds.
Her name has echoed through this legal saga for years. Senator Linda Reynolds was the Minister for Defence Industry back in 2019 when one of her young staffers, 24-year-old Brittany Higgins, alleged she'd been raped by a 23-year-old colleague, a slightly more senior advisor named Bruce Lehrman. Justice Michael Lee last month found, on the balance of probabilities, Bruce Lehrman did rape Brittany Higgins on a couch in Reynolds' ministerial suite in Parliament House. It's the same suite where Reynolds held a meeting with Higgins in the days after the attack. Reynolds says at that point she and her former Chief of Staff, Fiona Brown, had no idea anything untoward had gone on, only that the two young people had returned to the office after hours. Bruce Lehrman had been immediately told to pack up his things and leave the office. He subsequently lost his job. The Senator has said, and Justice Lee found, that both she and Fiona Brown in fact urged Brittany Higgins to take her complaint to police as soon as they understood the seriousness of the allegation. Indeed, Fiona Brown has given evidence that as soon as the word rape was mentioned, Reynolds ordered Brown to go to the police whether Higgins wanted to or not, and Brown said she refused, wanting to give the young woman the right to choose. Justice Lee found that in the years since, Higgins' story has changed. Back in 2019, Higgins expressed her gratitude for the support she received from Brown in particular. But by the time the allegation was aired in an episode of The Project in 2021, it had become, in Higgins' telling, a full-blown cover-up orchestrated by the former senator and her chief of staff. Here's what Brittany Higgins said on The Project about the alleged conspiracy.
I would try and raise it and I would try and bring it up, and it always sort of came back to sort of being a me issue, and if you can't deal with it, then you can leave.
It was a position Higgins maintained in evidence given at the criminal trial, which was aborted in 2022, and in defamation action brought by Bruce Lehrman against Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson.
A judge has delivered his decision in a defamation case which was initiated by Mr. Lehrman against Network 10 and journalist Lisa Wilkinson.
Brittany Higgins got a Commonwealth personal injury settlement, and Linda Reynolds, adamant that Higgins hadn't been mistreated, referred the settlement to the National Anti-Corruption Commission, or NAC, for investigation. Brittany Higgins and her partner David Sharaz took to the social platform now known as X following that referral to criticise Reynolds in a series of tweets. And now Reynolds is suing Higgins and Sharaz for defamation in the West Australian Supreme Court.
Well, Linda Reynolds is very upset that she continues to be blamed by Brittany Higgins for allegedly covering up her rape by Bruce Lehrman.
Stephen Rice is the Australian's New South Wales editor.
Those social media posts were basically along the same lines, the same implication, that Reynolds in some way either connived in covering up this rape, or that she bullied Higgins in the aftermath of it, or that she was just generally uncaring in the way she handled the rape.
Justice Lee found Brittany Higgins' changing tune coincided with the arrival in her life of David Sharaz. Sharaz and Higgins are engaged. He popped the question at Byron Bay's famous lighthouse on New Year's Eve in 2022 and shared the moment on Instagram. Sharaz is a former journalist and political media advisor who worked most recently in a radio business in Brisbane. Sharaz, who's also worked as a TV producer, was a crucial part of the public airing of Brittany Higgins' story. Higgins had made it clear to her political bosses and colleagues in 2019 that she didn't want the matter to go further. But by 2021, Sharaz was pitching the story to The Project in a document titled Liberal Party Me Too Project Pitch. And he participated in preliminary interviews with host Lisa Wilkinson and producer Angus Llewellyn. In that pre-interview and in subsequent messages with Higgins, Sharaz discussed what he described as a close relationship with senior figures in the Labor Party. Sharaz's animus towards the coalition government was also clear. He described then Prime Minister Scott Morrison using the C word and told Lisa Wilkinson he hoped it was Linda Reynolds' time when they were discussing the fallout from the story. Justice Michael Lee was curious about David Sharaz, and he repeatedly asked counsel for Lehrman and the defendants why they didn't call him as a witness in the defamation trial. We've used a voice actor to bring you his words from court.
It appears from the communications between Mr Llewellyn and Mr Sharaz, who's like the prophet Elijah in this case. There's a place for him here at the Passover table, but he never turns up.
In handing down his findings in April, Justice Lee said the untruths aired by Brittany Higgins fell into two distinct categories. The first, he said, were understandable. She was a young person processing a traumatic experience and potentially trying to conceal embarrassing elements of her own behaviour. But the judge said the second group of untruths, like those told about the alleged cover-up in the Project interview and later in court, were in a different category. And it was that second group on which David Sharaz had the most bearing.
The motivations of Mr Sharaz in selecting the journalist to tell and use the story were manifest, and rather than this motive being a cause of some degree of circumspection, Mr Llewellyn and Ms Wilkinson indicated their willingness to assist in the political use of the allegations as Ms Higgins and Mr Sharaz intended.
Now, David Sharaz has said he can't go on defending Linda Reynolds' defamation case. He's run out of money.
Sharaz says that he can't afford to continue the case, so he's essentially thrown his hands up in the air and thrown himself on the mercy of the court. He's saying that he just doesn't have the capacity to fight anymore. Whether or not that's true, it's clear that Brittany Higgins still must have a major part of the $2.4 million that she got from the Commonwealth as compensation for the events following this rape. And I have to stress that most of that award was not because she was raped in a Commonwealth office. Most of it was because she alleged that she had been mistreated by her bosses, principally Linda Reynolds, in the aftermath of the rape. So Linda Reynolds is saying, well, apologise or I will continue to pursue you in this lawsuit.
Justice Michael Lee's second big finding was that there was no cover-up, no political conspiracy.
As we will see, when examined properly and without partiality, the cover-up allegation was objectively short on facts but long on speculation and internal inconsistencies. Trying to particularise it during the evidence was like trying to grab a column of smoke.
Ten had argued in its defence it never claimed there was a cover-up, but the judge didn't buy that. This is how the project opened its show.
Tonight, claims of rape, roadblocks to a police investigation, and a young woman forced to choose between her career and the pursuit of justice.
In the febrile atmosphere of 2021, many instinctively believe what Ms Higgins asserted about the rape and the subsequent cover-up of the crime. In advance of any trial where the rape allegation would be examined, the broader allegations of Ms Higgins resulting her in being feted by many, becoming a celebrated speaker at a mass demonstration, becoming nominated for awards, receiving invitations to make a nationally televised speech at the National Press Club, and a book deal with Penguin Random House apparently worth $325,000.
After the judgment was handed down, Brittany Higgins took once again to social media to share her reaction. We've used a voice actor to bring you her words.
Senator Reynolds and Fiona Brown have also been hurt, and for that I'm also sorry. My perceptions and feelings about what happened in the days and weeks after my rape are different from theirs. I deeply regret that we've not yet found common ground. I hope we can resolve our differences with a better understanding of each other's experience. It has been 5 years of criminal and civil trials and government inquiries for the truth to finally be heard. It is now time to heal.
Coming up, the reports of holidays and investment decisions that really got Linda Reynolds riled up. We'd love you to join our subscribers at The Australian. It's a lot cheaper than taking a defamation suit in the WA Supreme Court, and you get all the news, business, sport and politics you need 24/7. Check us out at theaustralian.com.au, and we'll be back after this break. In his judgment, Michael Lee found that Brittany Higgins had told untruths in a claim for loss and damage she made against her former employers, the Commonwealth of Australia. Higgins claimed she'd suffered ostracism and victimisation by the former Morrison government after raising her claim of rape. She said the Commonwealth should be made to pay for its failings, including failing to launch an immediate inquiry and allowing her to be bullied and harassed at work and pressured not to talk about her rape. Higgins claimed she would be unable to work in future and claimed for 40 years of future earnings and superannuation. In December 2022, the Albanese government settled the claim, paying Higgins $2.4 million in taxpayers' money. The Commonwealth deed, of course, was a separate legal negotiation between Brittany Higgins and the Commonwealth. It was agreed not long after Labor had come to power. There were suggestions at the time that this was Labor just seeking to make this whole matter go away. But Linda Reynolds and Fiona Brown, the Chief of Staff, who had been Brittany Higgins' boss at the time, were not allowed to be represented at that negotiation, were they?
Not only were they not allowed to be represented, but the Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, told Linda Reynolds that he would refuse to pay any of her legal costs if she even turned up at this hearing. It was extraordinary.
In August 2023, the Daily Mail published a story on what happened after the settlement. Here's what the Mail story said. We've used a voice actor.
Following the settlement, Ms Higgins took Mr Sharaz on a holiday to the Maldives, rented a house on the Gold Coast, and then set up a discretionary investment trust in February, which protects her assets from any future lawsuits.
Linda Reynolds was very interested in that paragraph, and now she's citing the story in a new legal action she's taking in the West Australian Supreme Court. Reynolds is going after the trust, asking a judge to set the trust aside so she can access any assets still held by Higgins if she wins the defamation trial. Here's Stephen Rice.
There's a whole bunch of different proceedings that could have led Brittany Higgins into a position where she might owe people lots of money. So obviously you have this case by Linda Reynolds where Higgins might have to pay out significant damages and costs. It's possible that Brittany Higgins' publisher might want a refund of advances that it paid to her for her book, which she hasn't ever published and perhaps never will. And of course, there's a possibility that Bruce Lerman himself might have sued Brittany Higgins at some point, especially if he'd won this case against Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson. So there are all sorts of reasons that might have motivated her over a year ago to set up a trust to protect assets that she held from being discovered by anybody seeking to pursue them.
Reynolds has also alleged the trust was made with the intent to defraud future creditors.
What Linda Reynolds is claiming is that Higgins intended to defraud future creditors by setting up a trust to protect the money she received in this compensation payout from the Commonwealth.
Now, Higgins has not had an opportunity to respond to that allegation, and nothing has yet been proven. But it demonstrates Reynolds is not going to let this matter drop. Here's Stephen Rice.
No, she's definitely not going to. She's made it very clear that she's going to continue with this case unless Brittany Higgins just fronts up and says, I was wrong. And it can't be too difficult to do that, surely, given that Justice Michael Lee has now stated in his judgment definitively that there was no cover-up, that Linda Reynolds, in fact, cared very much for what happened to her young employee in the days after that incident and was insistent that she go to the police. So that there's just no question now that the allegations made against Reynolds were false.
What's the likelihood that the Commonwealth would try and get that money back?
I think it's pretty unlikely. I mean, you're right that there is a possibility, there's certainly a legal possibility that the Commonwealth could come after Higgins if she admitted that the allegations were false, because a large part of that settlement was based on this idea that she hadn't been given any help by her bosses, and indeed that there'd been this attempt to cover it up, that they'd failed in their duty of care to her. Now, theoretically, the Commonwealth could go, look, we want our money back. But the reality is that it would be very difficult for anyone to untangle the web of that settlement, because undoubtedly there was some part of settlement that was legitimate. She was raped by a fellow government employee in a government office where neither of them should have been allowed to be there. So she would have been entitled to some money, even though the bulk of it was on this basis that she wasn't cared for properly. I think it's very unlikely that anybody would try to untangle that. I think it's very unlikely that any government would be willing to try to get money back from a rape victim. It's just unlikely. So I don't think she should be worried about that. I think she should just come out and say, I was wrong, I'm sorry.
After the federal court judgment, Ricey, you wrote a piece of analysis in which you said it's now time for both sides to just accept this result.
No, I wish they would.
Tell me what that means. What does that mean for Bruce Lehrmann first?
Well, Bruce Lehrmann has announced that he's investigating the possibility of an appeal. That would be very costly. It's difficult to imagine that he's going to be able to raise the funds to do that. I think Justice Lee delivered a very thorough finding on the question of whether or not Bruce Lehrmann raped Brittany Higgins. And his finding that on the balance of probabilities, Lehrmann did rape Higgins just seems unlikely to be able to be challenged in any appeal.
Stephen Rice is the Australian's New South Wales editor. The Reserve Bank Board meets today, the first Tuesday of the month, to decide whether or not to move interest rates. Inflation is still stubbornly high, and some economists are predicting another hike. You can be the first to know by joining our subscribers at theaustralian.com.au.